Dune Imperium, For the King and Me, and Eternals. This is Staying In.
Dan and Pete, I'm going to count you in. And remember, we've all got our note. Right.
Yeah.
Right, we've all got our note. Put that note in your mind. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Can you tell who's got sleeping children? Happy birthday, dear Christopher. I'll go high. Happy birthday to you. And many more. Happy birthday, Chris.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Did you have a good day?
Yeah, it was a nice day. Yeah, I mean, I had to go to work, but it was a very, very lovely day. Do you know what? It honestly was one of the best birthdays I've had in a long time.
Ah, that's nice. Why?
There's instances where, like, I mean, to get materialistic, like the gifts I received were just so beautiful and just so treasured and so thoughtful, but just like I'd received like a flood of communications from people I hadn't spoken to in a while, and it was just really, really nice just how that kind of all happened, really. So I had a really, really lovely birthday, actually. It was really, really nice.
Go on then, talk us through the loot. That's all we're here for, is the materialistic.
Sweet stash. The three of you delivered in more ways than one. It was extraordinary. I genuinely moved to tears, I would say. Genuinely. I'm not afraid to admit that. I got an incredible... I mean, it was like the proper Holy Trinity of perfect gifts, really. So I got Above and Below, a Ryan Lockett game, and I'd mentioned, I think once or twice to a couple of you in the past, that I've always wanted to own a Red Raven game or play a game by Ryan Lockett, so that was just an absolute treat to get. I got Volume 2 of Paper Girls by Brian K. Vaughan, which I know I've lent you the first volume of that, Sam, which I absolutely love it. It's just this giddy, kind of propulsive, Stranger Things-esque, wisecracking coming-of-age story, really.
I remember I read I think I'm sort of halfway through it now, and I read it and I messaged you immediately saying that I think Brian K. Vaughan is becoming my favourite comic book writer. And the uniqueness of all his creations is stunning. Where Scott Snyder, I think, is incredible, and I think he's my favourite Batman writer. All his stuff tends to skew towards the same sort of themes and genre, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. He knows what he excels in, and you should write about what you know, which in Scott Snyder's case is leaving his sons without a dad. But Brian K. Vaughan, like Why the Last Man, Saga, and now Paper Girls, like it's quite a sort of body of work. And
it's not bad, is it?
No, it's not bad at all.
It's a safe pair of hands, really.
Absolutely.
And the third of the free gifts I got from you was, get this. Well, you know what it is, so I don't know why I have to add tension. A Lego version of a bonsai tree for me to build. I'll still probably, knowing my track record with houseplants, somehow kill it.
Yes.
Even though it's made of plastic. But genuinely, that was perfect. I cannot wait. I haven't had time to get to anything like that sort of stuff at all since my birthday, really. So I'm really looking forward to sitting down and putting that together. What I really, really love, and I didn't realise this until I flipped the box over, is that you can, if you want to, shed its leaves or let it blossom at instances. I don't know if I'll remember to do that per se. I might just have all the seasons at once.
It won't be like a physical barometer for your mental health. If I walked into your flat and all the leaves are falling off the bonsai, I'm like, oh, Chris.
Well, like E.T.
What else did I get? I got The City of Mist by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, who's one of my favourite Spanish authors who wrote The Shadow of the Wind years ago. I've still got one book on his shelf I've not read from that series, The Labyrinth of Spirits, and this is the next one, which is a series of short stories set at that time in Barcelona. I got a book of The Art of Spirited Away by Studio Ghibli, which is just stunning. Oof. Absolutely stunning. I got Batman Eternal Volume 1, which I'd never read. My brother bought me that.
It's good, that.
Speaking of Scott Snyder.
Yes.
And James
Tinian the Fourth, I think.
Tinian the Fourth, yes. and many other things as well, really. But it's been really, really lovely. Genuinely, really, really stoked. So thank you again, gentlemen.
Oh, it's nice. The last birthday of the year.
I thought you were going to say like ever. I was like, oh gosh, what do you know that I don't?
Birthday ever.
A bit ominous. Yeah, last birthday of the year. Closer now to 40 than I was last week.
What do you think it'll be like getting to 40 for us? Like, what do you think? Because, like, I don't feel like I'm 36. 36. I don't feel like I'm 36.
There came a point, like when I turned 34, that after that point, I've always had to just think for a moment what my age is.
Yeah.
Up until then, I knew exactly what my age was, and now I have to kind of stop and think. I think I've kind of plateaued, not in terms of life, but I think I've plateaued in terms of just my mental age. Now I am perpetually going to stay at this age. Really, I think.
Oh,
It feels
so
like
you'll always be mentally 36.
Yeah, that's what I reckon.
People say that 50 is the new 40.
Yeah, they're mainly 50-year-olds.
That's fair. How old do you think we'll all live to?
Wow. I mean,
So,
Yeah,
I've got the inside scoop on this, Pete. Because on my first day at primary school, Luke Kemp read my palm and told me I was going to die at 85.
85.
brilliant.
And my first day of primary school.
Listener, tune back in 50 years.
I was in Ireland once, and I went into a bar, and this woman grabbed me and read my palm, and she told me, that one day I'll be involved in a horrific accident, but I will survive. So even though that was quite tragic, I did leave that pub with some sort of sense of invincibility. You know, I was on the Ryanair flight home, like, sorry everyone.
Actually, like that's really interesting, because does that mean you can just get into as many accidents as, like, you've got one, like you'll definitely survive one of them. So
it just means that you can live your life however you want until you have that accident, and then suddenly, oh my god, I'm negative, I'm a hermit.
I'll be like that guy at the end of Final Destination, you know, when he's in that shed, and he's like, for some reason he goes to that fisherman's shed and he has to like cover all like the fishing poles and things in like sellotape so he doesn't get killed, and he has to like open tins with gloves and sponges and things.
Yeah, I think I will live to 140, because they've already said, right, and I can't remember who they are, but they've said that the first person to live to, I want to say 1,000, has been born.
Yes, my child and Dan's child are possibly maybe the infinite generation.
Now that's exciting.
It's a bit rubbish though, isn't it? Just missed out on it.
What, we've just missed it?
We just missed the cut.
Actually, yeah.
So obviously it was your birthday, Chris, and we did have some sort of celebrations. Pete and Dan, unfortunately, you couldn't make it, but we did celebrate. Pete and Dan, you might be interested that apparently Chris is a whiskey sours drinker, which
Oh, very nice.
Which
Yeah,
shocked
good.
me.
Yeah.
Did it shock Chris?
And I had a little bit of a headache the next day because, as you say, I'm 36 now, and even a modicum of booze would give me a little bit of a hangover. But it was very pleasant.
I'm just thrilled to know that your stomach is accepting whiskey again after.
I know after your
drought.
21st birthday, Peter Wellington, which I won't repeat on this pod. It is somewhere out there in another episode at some point about how you wrecked my stomach.
I don't think I was there for that. I don't know if we were pals. We must have been pals.
Well, no, we weren't all friends.
No, but we weren't all enemies.
Yeah.
So
We were approaching pals.
Approaching pals. Me, Chris, and a mutual friend got together, had whiskey sours, and played games as we do now. And it was a lovely evening. We carried on this evening was planned for your birthday, Chris, but it was also planned after we'd come out of Dune, because both you and our friend Matt sort of put me in a corner and said, we need to play Dune Imperium with you. Dune Imperium, you need to play it. It's great. And then we put a date in our diary then and there. So we played Dune Imperium, which is really good. I really liked it. in terms of worker placement games and deck building games, I think it's definitely up there. And the theme, the theme is really, really good. Like, yes, yeah, I think one of the things that Dune has is definitely a rich sort of cast of characters, and definitely like a cast of houses. They all play into those themes really, really well. Like, Chris was playing as Paul Atreides, and like basically within the first 2 turns, he basically become a spice master, and like he was just like riding worms, gathering spice, just like, you know, just had all those connections. And Matt was playing as Baron Harkonnen, and basically we were all convinced, all of us, that Chris was going to win. And it was just like, well, what's the point of... Even I was just like, what's the point of playing anymore? Like, Chris is going to win. We can't stop him. And then basically Matt, as the Baron, pulled out the win on the very last turn. And it was just like, yep, that's a very Harkonnen thing to do.
Yeah, no, but what was lovely as well is he wasn't like he was in private going, oh, they don't realise I'm going to win. He had no idea. He just happened to draw the cards he needed, because as well as being a worker placement, Dune Imperium is also a deck builder. And it's those and that synergy is something that's become quite popular at the moment. Lost Ruins of Arnak is another that does something similar, worker placement with deck building. So essentially everyone starts with the same deck of cards. There's variable player powers, but it's about the luck of the deck, into the luck of the draw in terms of drawing cards and playing them, and then buying cards from a market, which you can then use to pump up your deck. And then the tricky thing in Dune is in those finding those rare instances when you can actually discard cards. Because it's a worker placement, if Sam was to go to the place where you can discard cards, oh bugger, I can't go there now.
Yeah.
So and that was one of the reasons that I've struggled with the game we play, was because I hadn't really adopted a good discarding strategy. Instead, what I did was I just basically made it so my character kept just drawing loads and loads and loads of cards to kind of mitigate that, really. So I was cycling for my deck very quickly, but I was more
It's a
likely
very Paul Atreides thing to do, though. He's very overloaded.
Classic Paul.
He's got a lot on his plate.
But I also say, and I don't know if you agree with this, Sam, because we've not spoken about this, it's one of those rare games where actually the fact that it's the film tie-in to Dune, and the fact that, you know, I'm playing Paul Atreides and it's Timothée Chalamet on my, you know, on my player board, that actually didn't put me off, because it's not a photo. It's not like The Expanse, which we spoke about a few episodes back. You know, if you'd never seen the film, you go, oh yeah, cool, grand. It is a really, really interesting game, because it captures the kind of the political intrigue of the game. And it depends really what you want to kind of do. If you want to engage in conflicts and fights, you can do that, but you can also pick and choose not to go into those conflicts. And sometimes actually knowing when not to fight is just as important as knowing when to fight, even though I think those two things are the same thing I've just said.
Yes, they are. But we all get you. And like, it's... I mean, this isn't the game I wanted to talk about, but hey, we're here now. And it's also Direwolf Digital make it, which we will all know because they made the app for Root.
Well, I know them because they did the app for the Pokemon trading card game.
Okay.
Which, I won't go into it further, but I'm just laying some seeds down. Just laying some delicate seeds down.
World building.
Just some world building. So it's called, what's it called?
The Pokemon trading card, the video
foreshadowing.
Game. Oh, right.
That's what we're doing.
Foreshadowing.
We're doing foreshadowing.
Wow.
So Pete's going to talk about Pokemon.
Yeah. Do you just want to do that now?
No.
I mean, I finished my point.
No, I'm going to wait for an opportune time in another podcast, in a future podcast.
Oh,
you don't know when it will come up.
But just going back to Dune Imperium just ever so slightly, I think the worker placement game I've had the most exposure to is probably Lords of Waterdeep, which is usually lauded as like, you're just getting into board games. You're just learning about worker placement. Have you played Lords of Waterdeep? Here it is. And whereas I think that game is fine and it's nice, I think it definitely has flaws, especially when it comes to things like when the thing you want to do is blocked by another player, offering up different options and avenues. I think Dune Imperium does a superb job of always offering up something that you can do which is beneficial and doesn't feel like the B or C option. It feels like slightly on par with what you were going to do, which I think is an exceptionally tricky thing to pull off. And also it handles first player turns really well, which is always a thing that irked me with Lords of Waterdeep, where you felt like you're wasting a turn just to be the first player next turn. But how Dune Imperium handles that feels a lot more unilateral and democratic, and everyone sort of gets a piece of that first turn pie naturally as the game goes along. So actually, if you were to say, let's play a worker placement game tonight, Sam, I'd probably plump for Dune Imperium.
Did you see? I was reading a news report today. I know this dates the podcast somewhat, but of them firing a dart into the moon, into not our moon, sorry, into like an asteroid around some kind of moon in the solar system to try and test the potential of to what extent can we veer an asteroid off course if one was coming towards the Earth.
They're basically replicating Armageddon.
Yeah. I did read that, but can I just to clear something up? It's not going to actually be a dart.
No, of course it's not a dart. It's not going to have Jim Bowen there.
Phil the Power Taylor's not standing at the hockey like...
Yeah.
There's only one word for that, magic darts.
Like Bruce Willis drilling a hole. One of my favourite things, you can see it on YouTube, is Ben Affleck's director's commentary to Armageddon, where he just rips the script to shreds and just like takes the mick out of the whole film. It's just like he just goes on massive rants about like the leaps of fantasy that script takes, where it's just like Bruce Willis can't train an astronaut how to use their drilling equipment, so he has to go to space.
Well, it's like when I did geology at A level. My geology teacher made us watch for one lesson the core about and humanity drilled to the center of the Earth, and basically he lowered the volume, and it was just him talking over it for the full length of the film about how it was wrong.
This is just somebody who before YouTube wanted to be a YouTuber. Like this is a Mr. Jenkins reacts.
Word up, it's your boy Mr. Jenkins. But one of the other games we played that evening was kindly sent to us from Coiledspring, and they sent us a copy of For the King (brackets and me closed brackets), which is another game from Iello, who we've featured quite a bit recently, actually. And because they're making some good stuff that we are interested in. And this is actually a reprint, a reimplementation of a game called Biblios, which you may or may not have heard of. And reimplementations really interest me because it's usually the sign of a good game that either was made at the wrong time when different things were the zeitgeist, so it got splattered, a theme got associated with it that, just didn't suit the gameplay at all. So Biblios was a game set in a monastery and had things to do with like books and being in a library, and even though like the actual gameplay I was interested in didn't really feel like the best theme. So For the King and Me brings definitely a different theme into it, where you're basically playing ministers and you're all vying for the best roles in this royal palace. You're vying for the best jobs in this royal palace. Basically, like a young king is ascended to the throne, and you're seeing a sort of a vacuum of power there. So you're trying to gather the best jobs in the royal house, so therefore to give yourself as a minister more power and sway over this young king. And even though that sounds quite dramatic and something that Voltaire would write about, it's actually quite done in a very humorous way. Like the art style is very like Ardaman, would you say, Chris?
Oh, very much so. It's the first thing I thought of when I looked at it. There's one particular character which he put up on the Instagram that I absolutely fell in love with. It was a bit like that particular figure from Splendor.
Oh, the Gant Man.
The Gant Man. We were just obsessed.
Oh, the Gant Man.
We were just obsessed. And every time, and it's really lovely, every time I play Splendor, that card comes up, and whoever I'm playing with say, oh, it's the Gant Man. It's often with people who don't understand what I mean by that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the Gant Man. But the art style of The King and Me is just as evocative. Like all the characters in it and all the cards in it scream personality. Anthony Weinstock did the art for this game. And, any card game, especially when, you're doing kind of sort of abstract things like vying for royal roles, to bring that to life, I think is a bit of a masterstroke and works really well. How the game actually plays is in two parts. So there's the first part is like an I split, you choose kind of part of the game. The second part is like an auction. So in the front of the table, in the middle of the table, you have these sort of these royal portraits, and then underneath each of them will be a specific job. So each of these portraits represents a thing like military, entertainment, household, and then a job underneath it. And each of those jobs will have a value between 6 to 1. So, for example, in job number 6, the 6-point job in cleaning is something like royal butler, but the 1-point job in cleaning is something like, was it something, Chris, wasn't it something like royal
chamber pots, something?
It was like chamber pot cleaner,
which is in some ways a different kind of butler.
Yes, 2 T's. So what you're attempting to do is gather cards in your hand, and each card in your hand will have a particular colour and a particular number. So say, for example, this cleaning area, this household area is orange. If you want to get one of those orange jobs, you've got to have the most amount of cards totaling up the highest number at the end of the game, and then you will win. If you've got the most points, you will win that top job. And that number against that job is basically victory points to the end of the game. So everyone's kind of looking at the jobs on the table, seeing which ones they want to go for. And during this first part of the game, you're trying to get those cards into your hand that's going to help you in the next game. So what you do is you pick one card up off the deck, you look at it, and then you have to decide what you're going to do with it. And you've got 3 options. You either keep it for yourself, you either put it in the table for the other players to then take from, or you put it in the middle of the table face down, ready for the second half of the game. And I played a couple of games that have been like this recently, and it's actually a mechanic that I begun to really enjoy. I think we've like New York Slice, New York Pizza is
Hanami Koji as well.
Hanami Koji is quite similar, and I love that internal struggle of picking up a card and going and looking at it and going, right, this benefits me, but there could be something better, or this benefits another person around the table, but I don't want them to have it. And those wonderful secret grimaces that were happening around the table when we were playing it, Chris, when you could see someone was picking up a card and having that internal fight of, shall I gamble? Shall I just, maybe there might be something better to come in the deck and I don't want to give up something? Or equally, not being able to take a card in the hand and having to give it to another player is also a wonderful side effect of how this first part works. And so this first part kind of goes on, you're collecting cards in your hand, as well as cards that enable you to win jobs at the end of the game. There's also cards that represent money and treasure, which is important for the second half. And there's also cards that allow you to change the value of the jobs that are currently listed or posted. So you could change a 3 to a 4, or you could change a 2 to a 1. So if I know, for example, Dan, that Chris is collecting lots of orange cards, I could start devaluing the victory point worth of the jobs in the orange sector, and he could consequently devalue ones that he knows that I'm going for, or boost up another set for another that he's going for. So that goes on until the deck's empty. Then we get to the second half of the game, which is pretty much when the game comes absolutely and springs to life and kind of really switched for me and went, this is interesting, and I'm bringing this to the table definitely again. Because you have an auction. So if you remember during my long explanation for the first half of the game that you're putting cards face down in the center, no one takes those until this part, where each card gets turned over one by one, and then there's an auction to see who wants it. And suddenly then it's, well, Chris, you're the worst person ever in an auction, which is quite a sight to see.
But ironically, I won the game.
You did win the game, but maybe it was your terrible auctioning tactic that led you to the win.
Well, what I find really interesting about this is that when you're drawing the cards to kind of choose where to put them, you have to you draw the cards initially in the first phase one at a time. So if you've got a card in your hand, okay, I feel like I should get rid of this card, but what if it's actually the best card I'm going to get this time round?
Yeah.
So it's not just the case in that second round you're just going through the pile of the worst cards that people have.
No.
There'll be some genuinely good gems in there, and there'll be some moments where you're thinking, oh gosh, yeah, I remember when I put that down. Oh God, now I've got to pay for it again. But what's really interesting as well is you've only got so much money, and those money is also cards. So there is this really interesting push and pull where you're trying to goad other people into spending all their money around the table. So it frees you up then to kind of clear up and take other cards that no one else can afford.
Better cards, yeah.
But also as well, there'll be instances where you go, right, okay, they've got it in them. I can see on the table they want to bid on this. If I just push them again and they'll say, I'm not bidding, you're like, oh no, I'm stuck now with this. I've got to pay for this. Great. And that the second phase, I think, was really, it became this really funny kind of almost party game, really.
It was an auction round that hit more for me than, say, something like For Sale, whereas For Sale is a good game. The stakes in the auction are not really understood until you've maybe played 3 or 4 games. However, immediately in For the King and Me, when you enter that auction stage, you immediately know what the stakes are. You know what cards the value of the jobs are there in front of you. You can see in your hand how weak and strong you are in certain colours. So immediately you go into that knowing kind of what you have to go for and how much sort of money you're willing to spend on it. Another twist of that auction phase is obviously there will be gold cards that turn up in the auction, but to buy those you have to bet with cards in your hand rather than actual cards that are worth treasure or money. So if you want to stay active in later rounds of the auction or you want to get more money, you have to start sacrificing your own cards, which means there's this almost like double think part of the game where you're thinking of, right, I know Chris has got a lot of blue cards, so I could just get rid of those. Or I can sacrifice some cards that I've got quite a lot of coverage in because I think I can still stay around some pace at the top without having so many of that particular colour. So the stakes are really, really high, and that I guess that's what you want when you get to an auction game.
We, as well, is becoming a running thing for us at the moment, Sam, because lockdown has eased in the UK.
Yes.
It's meant that we've been able to go to we're basically trying to catch up on a year of not being able to go to the cinema. This
is the most I've been to the cinema regularly in probably since the Lord of the Rings films came out, and I mean they were once a year. So
it was interesting you, Pete, talking about living to 140 because
go on.
The film that Sam and I saw was the latest Marvel film. And Marvel are now churning out loads of stuff at the moment. As of today's recording, the first 2 episodes of Hawkeye have just dropped, which I've not watched yet. But we may talk about that in a future episode. Sam and I went to see Eternals.
Now, we have a claim to fame here.
Do we? Oh, yes, of course. Yes. Schoolboy Chris.
Yes. So I did actually, yes. I'm just going to pick the name up off the floor as I say it. I went to school with a member of the cast, actually, yes.
Can I just say, during the screening, Chris did go to pains to actually point that out, even though I already knew that Chris went to school. Well, no, Chris attended the same school as Kit Harington.
Yeah, and college. I'd forgotten I went to college also with him.
Well, no, you didn't go with him.
Not every day.
Same.
Yeah, went to the same, yeah.
So we have 2 connections then.
Oh my God.
The other connection is one of the actors that is in it is a person called Kumail
Nanjiani.
And my understanding is that he's a comedian, like very popular. He was kind of like a bit of an internet sensation before the internet, before like YouTube and all that sort of stuff, right? Like Kumail is part of Staying In podcast, which we used to get emails from people when they came along after we'd started up. And there might still be some people listening to us who are like, when's Kumail going to come on? Well, the answer is...
Which is going to make it confusing when we start talking about his film.
Yes.
Right.
They gave us a shout out, didn't they, on their show? Because we kept, as you said, Pete, we kept getting their mail, and we got loads of people asking, saying that we should be nominated for the podcast awards, thinking we were them.
Like,
so we got a lot of traffic sent our way.
Link. And which was very, very generous. But yeah, it was very, very nice of them. And they were actually really good sports about the whole thing, which is really, really nice. So now we're talking about their movies. So now we can really put the boot in.
Yeah. And I should clarify that even though we've got such close links to high profile people, Sam and I didn't go to the premiere. We weren't invited.
You didn't get invited?
No. So
Chris, it would have been that you went to the same cinema at the premiere, but just not at the same time at the premiere.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I did. I did small talk with a guy at school and stuff. We used to play football occasionally, like when there was a football in the The last time I saw him,
every time he came on the screen, you were like, yeah, West Smith Massive or whatever it was.
He's representing Worcester.
Yeah.
Him and the sauce. That's all we've got.
The sauce.
And
I thought the sauce was like some sports star name or something.
The source of all greatness.
Right.
Steve the Sauce Bruce.
And he's good in this. He's really good. He's really funny in this. He actually has a lot of the levity. It comes from him actually in this, which is really cool. So this is from Chloe Zhao, who I don't know if you've seen Nomadland, which is on Disney Plus with Frances McDormand. A fantastic director. Like, I think everyone was amazed that Marvel had secured this director for the project, really. They themselves are a big fan of Marvel films and superhero films. They were particularly taken by Zack Snyder's Man of Steel in terms of how it was filmed. Because if you remember that very first trailer I remember watching the Man of Steel trailer, and it is like a Terrence Malick film. The way it's just filmed, it is stunning. Ultimately, I would argue the trailer's better than the film, although I need to revisit it because I think
I quite like some bits of Man of Steel.
Yeah, I remember liking it too. I just think you just get a bit fatigued by the blowing up of buildings and stuff at the end, really.
Absolutely.
But she was really taken by that, and this is a film that's really a kind of it's a meditation on humanity, I would say, and it's probably its biggest question is, are we worth it? I would say
it's the L'Oreal of Eternal films. Just to give Pete an idea of kind of the director that Chloe Zhao is.
Yeah.
So he knows kind of
vaguely where we're at.
Yeah. So Chloe Zhao is the kind of director who only films during magic hour. So that's a specific 40-minute window when the sun is just about to start to set.
Why do they do that? That seems like they're making quite a lot of work for themselves.
Because
Hollywood doesn't have an answer, does it?
No, but Pete, I think because the opposite of that was what George Lucas did with the Star Wars prequels, which was a green screen.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Basically, the light is, it's the magic hour where the light is just perfect, and you don't really need any external lighting to really light the scene, and it generally makes things look really good. It does mean there's quite a lot of lens flare because obviously the sun is quite low. But and she has won an Oscar for Best Film. So just to give you an idea of, she knows what she's doing with the camera.
Yeah, but she very much does. So the premise is this, Pete. Over 7,000 years ago, 10 immortal superpowered disciples, which are known as Eternals, are sent by a celestial to Earth to exterminate a race of creatures that is plaguing early humanity. These are called deviants. Over the centuries, they complete their mission, adopting Earth as their home, as they await their call to leave. And what's interesting is that many of our myths, our world myths, have been woven by their exploits. So you've got the Eternals, Circe, Athena, and Icarus and Phaistos being part of ancient Greek culture and those mythos. Gilgamesh from ancient Mesopotamia, Makari from Roman, and Kingo from Babylonian, and Sprite from the Celtic kind of myths. And so you're getting this cutting back and forth from this period, as we see them at different chapters throughout Earth's history, humanity's history, I should say, to the present day, where in the present day, they've kind of scattered themselves across the globe and integrated to varying degrees within humanity. However, there are kind of rumours of a return of these deviants, but these ones are different.
Because they were have you seen 2001, Pete?
Yes, like my favourite movie.
So the monolith in 2001. So the Eternals are quite similar to that. So one of their basically their jobs on Earth whilst they're waiting to leave is not only to destroy these deviants, but also to advance civilization. whilst they were there. So there's actually some lovely scenes where is it Hephaestus?
Yeah.
Is basically dreaming up like machines and engineering and going like, yes, he's like standing there in Babylonian going, look at this. This is the steam engine. This is going to blow their minds. And they're like, we need to dial it down a little bit. And he's just like, right, here's the plow.
Yeah.
You're happy now?
But I'm a big fan of these narratives of getting the band back together, where like you've had a group of people that in the past were a real strong unit and then we're cut to the present and they're all kind of scattered, and it's about getting people to kind of come back into the fold. I'm really interested in terms of just seeing when they've all kind of dispersed and gone their separate ways, the tensions that occur when you try to bring them all back together. And there are some tensions here really, because some of the Eternals have really kind of just humanized themselves and become part of that life. Others have never really settled. They're waiting for that call to go home. Others are really just at odds in terms of what humanity's done to itself, and they're really kind of thinking, well, what's the point? These people don't know how to look after their planet. Clearly, these Eternals have lived through 7,000 years, and it makes it a very interesting Marvel film because the Marvel universe is 10 years old, really. Well, 13 years old. I did the maths on this. That is like 0.2% of what the Eternals have experienced. So really, everything in the MCU, from Iron Man to Endgame, is just a tiny blip. It's insignificant, really. And that really puts things into perspective, because this is a long film, and it has a particular pace that is quite slow and reflected. But that is indicative of the fact, my argument is, that these people, their perception of time is completely different. For them, a year is just a minute, essentially. It's a complete blip. So they've got all this time to think, to meditate, to ponder. And what Chloe Zhao wanted to do with this was she wanted to try and make it as epic as Endgame, but also retain a degree of intimacy. So there is this little bit of a kind of an expansion and contraction at times, where you've got these incredibly world-changing events, because in some respects this is really big. It's the scale of the planet, really, and I think it jumps between more locations than any other Marvel film in history, really. But at the same time, it is about the relationships between these 10 Eternals. Some of them are love relationships, others are, strictly speaking, platonic, others are kind of more antagonistic, say, for example. And what I find really fascinating about this is how they're not defined by their powers. Yes, you've got somebody who's got very powerful fists to punch things. Yes, you've got Angelina Jolie as the Fina, the warrior. Yes, you've got Icarus, who's basically Marvel's version of Superman. But they're not defined by that, defined by other things. And the longer they've spent on Earth, the more kind of human they've become to some degree, whether they like it or not. And I found that really quite interesting, that kind of family dynamic. It is not your typical Marvel film. It has a completely different rhythm. Rhythm. Yeah, I think it'll appeal more to, in some respects, more to non-Marvel fans. The stuff that irritated me was the stuff where it starts to be a Marvel film, where you've got your post-credit stings, other kind of touchdowns. They mention like Steve Rogers and all the Captain of the Avengers and stuff, really. But what I quite like is they're not just going back in time and reliving all the Marvel moments from the Eternals' perspective, because again, that's 0.2% of what they've experienced. Instead, as Sam says, you go to Babylonia. You go to Egypt. You go to, there's a very poignant moment where Hephaestus is in Hiroshima and he's just weeping. This is the person who said, let's give them the steam engine, won't this be great? And you cut to 1940s and he's like, what the hell have I done? This is my fault. Yeah. And that is, it's like, are we worth it, really? And, there's something inherently post-human about this film that I find quite interesting. And to what extent are we worth saving? Because it's something that's never questioned in a Marvel film. All these exploits, Ultron chucking like a town on top of the planet. Oh gosh, we need to save the planet. But actually, are we worth it?
Yeah.
Are we?
Like half the planet gets destroyed and it's just like no one questions. Of course, we're going to bring everyone back. That's the kind of thing. I think the Eternals is lovely, and I really have a lot of time for it, and I really want to see it. I'm desperate to see it again. It's got a bit of critical kicking.
That's what I was going to pick on, because it apparently tested. It was the worst testing Marvel movie when it was in front of like whatever test audiences. Is that what they're called?
Yes, test screenings,
screeners. Yeah. So why do you think it's divisive? Because I've seen people who are ranting and raving about it and saying, really great, love it. And I've also seen people saying, you can skip it.
I don't know. Ask Dan.
Oh! I feel there's tension in the group.
On this podcast, we like to be positive. We don't like to talk about things that we don't like because it's not fun for us. It's not fun for people who are listening. But we're talking about Eternals.
Yeah.
And I really, really didn't enjoy this film.
What was it then that put you off? Like, what was the thing about this movie that kind of rubbed you up the wrong way?
I think on paper, there's a lot to like about this film. As Chris alluded to, you have a very interesting director with a very distinct visual style, which it does look like no other Marvel film before it, which is fantastic. We want changes. We want new ideas, new visions, new voices coming into this. It has a very, very diverse cast, which is long overdue, and it's a very good cast. The treatment of certain relationships in it, and certain homosexual relationships in it, are very well dealt with, and again, long overdue, and not dealt with in a way that kind of feels token. It just feels natural, which is fantastic. But the issue I had was, the word I keep coming back to is confused. The film feels confused. Chris mentions kind of going back in time and forward in time. It seems to jump around an awful lot. It's a long film, but you've got 10 characters, and I think only 2 of them feel developed for me. 10 kind of Eternals, only 2 of them really feel developed. The rest of them have very little screen time to really get kind of underneath the skin of their characters. There are some enjoyable characters. I really liked the character of Phastos. Gilgamesh, I thought, was brilliant. Kingo was great, although I think sometimes played a little bit too comic relief for my liking. But you don't have enough time with all of the characters to really let them kind of settle in this world. And so when it comes to kind of in the final kind of climax, as you enter the third act, some of the decisions the characters make don't make sense to me, and I'm questioning them, and I feel like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. There's going to be a twist, and then there's not a twist, and I don't understand why they've made decisions they have, because the film hasn't kind of given me that time. Chris mentioned kind of that there's a point in the film with the character of Phastos at Hiroshima, very poignant moment. However, I don't feel like the film earns that, because it doesn't give that character the build to get to that point. It's a very poignant moment, but as I say, it's not earned, and it would need. There's several kind of story threads or character relationships where I feel like there are scenes missing. There's one relationship which appears to come out of nowhere, is quickly forgotten again, and I feel like there were like 3 or 4 scenes missing from the film that perhaps would have given me a bit of background to that.
Do you think this would be better as a, same budget, same kind of characters and all that sort of stuff? Do you think this would be better as a TV series?
I think it would, because in a TV series, you would narrow down in on 1 or 2 characters, and you would give them the space to breathe, and then you would bring in another, and you would give them the space to breathe, and that would build it up slowly, rather than kind of throwing everything at the wall. Because, it does integrate them into the film, but I was getting kind of reminders of the likes of like Justice League or the likes of Suicide Squad, which are not good comparisons, because their treatment of a larger cast is really bad. It's not as bad as them, because like Suicide Squad is just terrible. It's not as bad as them, but I was thinking, you get to the point of like, okay, so now we're going to go here and we're going to meet this guy. Okay, so now we're going to go over here and meet this guy. It's like they have a conversation. The conversation ends with them saying the name of someone else, and then we go and meet them. They have a conversation, it ends with them saying the name of someone else, and we go and meet them. And so I really kind of struggled just to really get to grips with all of this. And as the film ends, it also left me kind of... With Marvel films, there is a suspension of disbelief that goes on. When you watch Avengers in New York City, a portal opens up in the sky and aliens come out. The suspension of disbelief there. But the films are rooted in a reality. They're grounded in that reality. By the end of Eternals, the suspension of disbelief has been pushed, for me, was pushed to my absolute limits, where this no longer feels like a fictional version of our world. It feels like a fictional world. which in something like Guardians of the Galaxy is fine. It's out in space. You can, that's absolutely fine. It's a fictional world. You don't have that connection. You have Peter Quill, Star-Lord, to give you that connection. Whereas when it's set on Earth, and I mean, portions of it are set in London, which is an area I know very well. I lived there for 10 years. This should feel kind of, I should be able to relate to this more than any other film. But it doesn't feel like, it feels just like a fictional world that, as a result, I don't care about it. And I found myself thinking a couple of things I've never thought about a Marvel film before. I found myself thinking, is this MCU Marvel juggernaut losing steam? And that's what it felt like. It felt like this was the B team compared to what you've had before. And then I also, the most damning thing, as I got to the end of the film, I was thinking, I've got no interest in spending any more time with these characters. Not that I hate them, but they're not interesting to me. And by the time I left the cinema, I mean, I was questioning Marvel's decision making. And if you've seen the film, you may know what I'm alluding to with that. I don't like being negative. And there were things to be positive about: using new directors, using new visions, using a diverse cast, treating character relationships properly. All should be applauded and have been applauded. But I just found it a bit of a mess, a bit confused and a bit boring.
To be honest, Dan, that is probably one of the most succinct and constructive bits of feedback this film has got. Even if it is like criticism, that's more constructive in terms of what you said than a lot of critics. And a lot of the stuff you said, I do agree with. I think it was always going to be a perennial issue having 10 main lead characters, essentially, that some are going to fall by the wayside. Like, I really love Barry Keoghan. I watched The Green Knight, and he's just magnetic in it. Same with films like Dunkirk, Killing of a Sacred Deer.
Have you seen is it American Animals?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
What a film.
Oh, extraordinary.
Magnetic is the word I would use for him. But as I said, I really wanted to spend a bit more time with him because I don't think he was developed enough for me to fully understand the decisions he makes in that film.
But you may do. Yep, that's the beautiful thing about Marvel, really, I think.
But now I don't. Now I've lost interest. That's the problem.
Oh. Yeah, but how can you develop someone who's 7,000 years old? How can you possibly understand their complete range of sort of what pulls and pushes and kind of what motivates that person? And like, Chris is right, I think, and I think you're right in a way that the reason why this hasn't been received as critically as the same as other Marvel films is that there's not really much to relate to in these characters. Like, there's one human analog who 7,000 years old, but for me, whereas for others that could be quite off-putting, for me that's exceptionally intriguing in terms of a narrative. Like, I love that kind of, hanging around with people and learning and looking at how they look upon us and how they look upon the world. Like, there's one character in there who is like over 7,000 years old, but she looks like 16. And I think that is incredibly intriguing that she has lived for this long on Earth, but has never fully felt integrated into the human experience, never been allowed to live a life, and never been able to really experience what she deems to be human. I think that's absolutely fascinating. I think every single character has a moment where they either struggle with adapting to the human condition, or they struggle with the fact that they're on this task for such a long period of time. I think to do that in the time span that it does, I think is such a superb move. I think one thing that I have noticed, and I thoroughly believe this, I think this film will be critically reassessed in the future. I've already seen quite a lot on Twitter about people going to see this a second time and completely reversing their thoughts on this film, going into it knowing what they know and knowing that this is going for a completely different genre. I mean, this is essentially a fantasy movie. This is the best DC film that's ever been made. I mean, this is DC. This is Jack Kirby through and through. This is, dealing with much grander, celestial, for want of a better word, concepts that aren't grounded, that are fantastical, that have no basis in any reality that we know. And there are reasons why the Marvel films do a lot better than DC, because they have that human touch to them, whereas DC, you're playing around with gods, and this is the first time we're actually having gods in the Marvel universe. And I think for a lot of people that has been kind of whiplashing. But for me, Chris and I think we just adjusted to that quicker than some other people will. I think that on second viewings, people are going to really come round to this movie and see it for the wonderfully human experience that it is.
So you've been doing what, Pete, with Call of Cthulhu?
All right, so I'm going to come at this from a different angle this time. How many different angles can I come at the Call of Cthulhu? So I've been part of the storytelling collective. Talking about collectives. The Write Your First Adventure Call of Cthulhu Path Fall 2021 edition. And basically, the Storytelling Collective is basically a paid educational program whereby you are taught various storytelling techniques, and they have separate courses over very specific things. So one of them is like finding your creative heartbeat. One of them is about how you get past writer's blocks. One of them is about writing your first like adventure encounter. So like how you would construct an encounter. And they mostly tend to be based around things like writing RPG content. So it was, I believe, founded by a woman who did big chunks of work on the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition Icewind Dale. Which is meant to be very, very well regarded. And I don't play 5th, so I don't know, but very well regarded stuff. And this Call of Cthulhu path has other writing experts who have gone through and done Call of Cthulhu adventures throughout the years. I believe one of them is called Paul Fricker. And Paul Fricker has written a whole bunch of different stories for Call of Cthulhu throughout the years, and writes a lot on something called the Miskatonic Repository. And this is really important to know about, because so when you create RPG content, because obviously I've created RPG content before, because I've run adventures with you guys, right, on different systems. And Chris loved the one that we did last time, right?
Oh, it was great, yeah.
Stuff. Chris loved it, as we all know. So I've created content before, but I've not really ever, created Call of Cthulhu stuff before, and I've been really into it recently. So I thought, yeah, okay, I'll sign up for the thing. Basically, what it is it's a month long, so it's all of November. And the idea is that from the start of November, you start on an idea, and it's a short adventure that you can run with a couple of people or maybe a small group. And then at the end of November, you are done, and you have written the whole thing, and you've laid it all out using proper set dressing and all that sort of stuff. And then it is published onto the Miskatonic Repository, which is run by Drive-Thru-RPG, which probably used in the past. Really cool place. And that is officially sanctioned Chaosium Call of Cthulhu content, in so much as they're like, yes, if you want to create content, this is how you do it, and this is the avenue that you can publish it, and it's totally fine for you to do that. Rather than something like where I've written like OSR stuff in the past, I've not published it. But that's totally fine to just publish, because that comes under this completely different license called like OGL and all that sort of stuff, which was just this big open gaming license thing. But this is a very specific one that was put together. And then when they're all published, they all get gathered together as like almost like a group, as like a graduation ceremony of everybody who took it and published at the end of that month of writing. And I did it because I've realized the most valuable thing to me out of this entire thing, right? I've learned all about things like 5 senses, like how you want to make sure that you're writing for all of those 5 senses, so that you're describing these things, like much more like active voice stuff. So you're talking about you do this rather than the player does this. Like you do that to really get the player into the mindset. Lots of really great stuff and things that I'd kind of thought about before, but not really crystallized in my mind a lot. But the major thing that I got from this was a deadline, because I cannot write and publish for Toffee if I'm just given stuff under my own steam. And I realized I put 2 and 2 together about halfway through this thing so far. So I'm about 3/4 of the way as of recording, and I've got a little bit of time left. And I realized that I've actually got quite far with doing it, which is great. And I realized I got really far with doing stuff when we were doing Basic Fantasy, writing up the Shard stuff, and I realised it's because I had a deadline every single week that I had to hit. And I'm sure, Chris, you've probably got a similar thing, right? You've got a deadline. You know you've got to create something.
Yeah.
And so it's just like you get on and do it. If you don't have that, certainly with me, if I don't have a deadline, I'm just like, So that's what I've come away from it from. And like I ended up having a deadline, learned all this really interesting stuff. And I've started, so I've basically been putting together an adventure, and it's going to be a one-on-one like we did last time, Chris. It's going to be that kind of thing. And I sent you over a voice recording of me in bed writing Call of Cthulhu.
Well, it was a video. It was a full-on video of you. I don't know why it had to be a video.
But I was in bed, and I was reading Chris the intro to this adventure, and basically saying like, "What do you think about it? Does it get you in the mood?" And all that sort of stuff. I got some really great feedback.
Hang on a minute. You're in bed recording something for Chris, asking you if this is getting him in the mood. Is just so I'm clear?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Yeah, set in the mood.
Yeah. Cool.
This is beginning to sound a little bit predatory.
Yeah. And Chris, did it get you in the mood?
Yeah, I'm still trying to work out what it was for, though. But no, genuinely, like, I'm really interested in this, Pete. So this will be archived. So this will be officially sanctioned then. So it'll have your name on it. So is there a kind of a precedent for this, that when players will use, say, for example, your game themselves, is there like a precedent for this through drive-through that they will kind of let people know and say, "Oh, thank you, really enjoyed using your
so it's got
RPG."
It's got all this same stuff, right? So like it's like a proper shop. Like you go onto the thing and you pay money for it and you download that thing and then you run it and then you can leave reviews, you can give criticism, all of this sort of stuff. Like is a proper like you are going to be published.
Wow.
And it's really cool because now I don't want to hype it up as like I'm going to have my novel published, because it's nowhere near like, you know, it's not like getting a publishing deal with Penguin, right? It's not that kind of level of thing. But what it is like that first step. It's that first step of like somebody basically gently pushing from behind and going, no, you need to get this done. Okay, come on. So that when it comes out the door and I can go, I've done it. I've got my first one out the way. Do you know what I mean? Like when you're creating stuff, Rich over at We're Not Wizards talks about this a lot. Just keep doing it. Just do it and do it and do it and do it, because you're just going to make rubbish to begin with. And then eventually you'll get to the point where you're doing stuff that you
Panning for gold.
Panning for gold.
So is there a prerequisite that you have to know about Call of Cthulhu to like get if you're burning to like write an RPG and have it published, is Call of Cthulhu the only RPG that you have to bloody learn about?
No, absolutely not. No. So Call of Cthulhu is this path is like officially partnered up with Chaosium, and that's great.
Okay.
So there is that if you want to go down that route.
And some prior knowledge of Call of Cthulhu is good before going in.
If you don't know about it, you should not sign up. Like if you don't know about the system that you're writing an adventure for, I would say don't bother, because it's not going to teach you the rules. Like, however, there is also a Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, and that version of this, which runs at the same time, and that is part of something called, I think it's called DM's Guild. Again, I don't really play 5th edition. DM's Guild is essentially the equivalent for Dungeons and Dragons content, which Wizards of the Coast goes, yep, cool, okay, if you want to go and do a proper Dungeons and Dragons thing, you can put it in DM's Guild, and you can sell it, and you can do anything you want with it, and here's all the stuff that you can do, and here's a set of art that you can use, and a layout that you can use, and all this sort of stuff, and that's really, really cool. And if you don't want to use any of those, there is also a system agnostic track, which is basically, okay, you're going to publish this somewhere, and that might be on Drive-Thru RPG, because obviously they've got good inroads in with them. But they also say you could put this on itch.io if you want to, for the system agnostic stuff. So again, if you wanted to learn more about Mothership, for example, if you wanted to go and write something for Mothership, and you just needed some structure and a form and like a learning environment like that, this is it. It's really good. And a deadline. That's the thing.
That was another episode of Staying In with Peter Willington, Daniel Frost, Sam Turner, and myself, Chris Darby. Hello again. It's been a while since I've edited the pod. I can confirm that I have been and seen The Eternals for a second time, and I enjoyed it even more than the first time. And I enjoyed it the first time as well, really. So I'd be really curious to know, I think we all would actually, what your views would be on of what is the most polarizing film in the canon of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, really, because I do think it is one that's going to be talked about for some time, really. And the way in which you can let us know is through the traditional email. stayinginpod@gmail.com is where you can communicate to us via the electronic letter. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram @stayinginpod is the handle for all of those, and many of you use those particular channels to reach out to us, either to say hello, say, oh, I disagree with that, or have you tried this? I think you'd be into that, really. And thank you again for listening. Thanks to Coiledspring for sending us a copy of For the King and Me. Thoroughly enjoyed that game. Really, really enjoyed that. That giddy shift to the auction at the end was probably the most fun I've ever had in a board game with an auction component to it, really. So really, really looking forward to playing that with Sam again in the near future. And thanks, while I'm here, thanks to my neighbour Matt for introducing both Sam and I to Dune Imperium. And I know he's just bought the expansion to it as well, so I'm looking forward to also playing that, really, as things in the UK are starting to relax a little bit, really, for the time being. Till next time, bye.